Hello everybody and welcome to the video. If you're watching this video right now, I presume I need to congratulate you on buying your new ski, and special congratulations if it is a Syndicate HO model. My name is Rob Hazelwood and today we'll be talking about everything that you need to know to set up your first ski. From binding placements to back binding placements to fins to aftercare, and generally everything you need to know to make you ski better on your brand new ski. So the first thing that I want to touch on today is our stock settings. Obviously these are specific to the HO skis line and you'll be able to find them at hosports.com/settings. This is where you will find all of the settings for the current line of skis and where we recommend that you start. So essentially where you are going to place the front binding, back binding, and the numbers that you are going to put on that fin. And one thing we do here at HO Skis is we often update our settings as the year progresses if we find any new settings that we think you should try, and see if we can get your ski riding the best that it can at those stock settings. So now that you've found those stock settings, first thing we need to do is mount those bindings. So we have the Syndicate hardshell and we place it essentially on the front 3 holes. We need to line up those holes, take our bag of screws that came with and insert these front 4 screws loosely. So it's worth mentioning that with the Syndicate hardshells, it's these front 4 that have the sliders. This back one has the hole that locks your binding in place. However, when we measure these bindings, it's very useful to essentially put in these first 4 screws so that then when we go to measure, we can slide like this, and it's just a simple forwards and backwards. There's not quite that same side movement. Let's take our tape measure and measure where we need to be. We now go essentially to just below where that clip mounts, all the way against the plastic, so as close to your heel as you can get. We pull that tape measure and we go to the back. This then allows us to see the measurement from the tail of the ski. This is incredibly important, and if you get this wrong, this will cause disaster for your slaloming. And now we have that measurement locked in. We loosely put in those screws and then make sure that everything is in that middle. And then we go around and tighten up all of those 6 screws. And it is just till they are tight and snug. We are not over tightening them. And since we often get asked where to measure on different boots, a good rule of thumb is the furthest back point of where you think that heel is going to be. So on this stance boot, right at that heel here, put that tape measure up against it, and this is a 67 carbon Omni, so we are going to 30 inches. And the last binding that I would like to show you the measurement place of is the animal binding, which again, we're gonna go from just above the plastic, measuring to that same place on the tail of the ski. So now we have that front boot all mounted up and we're happy with where that is placed. We are going to get onto the back boot. Very simple procedure. Everybody is very different here. There is no stock setting. So on a rear toe plate like this, we want to be comfortable to kick our foot in that rear kicker as hard as we can and not be making contact with that front boot. And how to measure that number. We put that tape measure in through that back boot. We again contact the same point that we would on the hardshell or the stance boot as before, and we pull that tape measure up and we find that number right at where the top of our ankle is going to be. For me, I'm a US size 10 and I like the measurement of around 8 inches. This is very different for everybody. Some people will be as close as 7.5, 7 or even 6, and that is okay. So once you reach a number that you feel comfortable with, we start off by loosely putting in all of our screws. Because with these rear toe plates, the animals, whatever binding you have on that back foot, we can always twist it a little bit. For me, my preference is to have it straight, as I feel like this gives me the most consistent feel. However, a lot of people like to open up their back foot. This can make it a little bit more comfortable on the hip and allow us to be in a little bit more of a powerful position, especially if you have tight hips or ankles. So as you'll notice, I am using the one-piece washer that comes with the HO back boots. When you're fitting this, just make sure that the hole pattern matches up with the washer, and this spreads the load out through the whole of the back plate. However, if you do not have one of these, some large washers can be suffice. And now you have all of those boots mounted. We just go around one more time and double check that every single one of those screws is nice and tight and we haven't missed one. So as well as the rear toe plate, we obviously also have the rear boot setup, or the double boot setup. This can be a little easier to set up, but also a little bit trickier to make the same every single time. However, a general rule of thumb for me, and because with the rear boot that we can put our foot in a little bit slower, we can test it a little bit easier. It always goes in the same place because there's no big kicking forces going on. So we screw our bindings probably as close as we can get to the nearest screw hole. Then once we have it entered, we put our foot in and we want to measure, and we don't want any more than a finger's width gap in between our longest toe and the boot in front. If we go further separated than that, we're going to have more of a tendency to get stuck on that back foot. And with the rear boot setup, you're already a little bit at the mercy of that anyway. So keeping those feet a little closer together, if you find that comfortable, is probably the best way. And in terms of measuring this, if you're taking notes and if you're wanting to keep this on different skis, there's two options for this. The first option we have, and probably the most simple but the least exact, is measuring from the hinge point or the ankle of each boot. So on the animal boot here, it's around here, so where that ankle bone would be. And again, on that rear boot, where that ankle or that hinge point in the binding would be. We then measure from that front hinge point to that back hinge point, and that is the separation of your ankles. This can be quite an easy one to do, but again, isn't the most exact. The other measuring option is to remove the front boot for a second, measure your binding like you normally would. Say that's 30. We then do the same thing. We place our boot back where it's going to be, and we measure from the tail of that binding. So that's 17. We can then subtract the first number from the second, so 30 from 17, and we are left with 13. That essentially is the separation from heel to heel. If you're keeping the exact same bindings every time, this can be easy to replicate on different skis and make your life a little bit easier to get the same setup every time. So now that we have those bindings absolutely dialed, let's learn how to check those fin numbers and, if necessary, how to move that fin. So the first thing we are going to need to do is remove this wing. So first things first, we want to turn on those calipers, make sure we are zeroed off and in inches, not millimeters, inches. First of all, we start with that length. So we open up those calipers, we make sure the tip of that caliper is right on the fin, not just on it, not gone past it to the other side of the ski. We're just on the edge of that tip, and the same rules apply for that tail number. So we're just on the front, just on the tail, and we are getting that number there. Again, we make sure that we're back, we're zeroed, and it's always a good idea to measure twice. Then we move on to the DFT, or the distance from tail. So with that DFT, we slide it on, pull the caliper all the way on with our thumb, push that against the fin and against the ski. Zero off at 0. We then pull it away, slide the caliper there, push there, and we get our measurement, 0.748. If you were to measure with non-slotted calipers, you would roughly take away around 30 thousandths off this number, making it 0.718 as a best guess, depending on your calipers. So moving on to the depth, we zero off. We make sure this end is flat against the ski, and we then tap our way along the fin. We want to try find the biggest number we can get to, which is 2.460. So now moving on with how do we change the actual fin if we are not at the stock numbers that we require. So to change your fin, you will need a 5/32 Allen key. A T-handle like the one here on Amazon is the one that I'm using in the video. So with the fin, it's a very simple procedure. We have these 3 screws. You have one here, one here, one here. Those 3 screws essentially lock in the fin and stop it from moving. So first of all, we're going to need our T-handle. This then can loosen those 3 screws just a little bit. So how do we then change that fin in relation to numbers? So we find that depth point. So the number right now is 2.488. That is obviously too much. This is a large Works 01, so that number, when we look back to our stock website numbers, is 2.455. So I'm going to go about a full turn on this depth screw, 2.467. We're getting a little closer. We then add another turn to that screw, and we see we are at 2.448. So we've gone too far. So now we just go little by little, we add a little bit of a turn, just a quarter of a turn to that depth. Again, not quite enough, 2.450, a little bit of a quarter turn again. This then puts us roughly where we need to be, a little bit too much. So I would go back, take about 1/8 of a turn out, and we should be roughly at 2.455 if all has gone to plan. So you work your way around the fin, getting everything dialed in. So then when we have that fin exactly where we want it, we make sure as we are pushing up with our hand like this, we tighten back up those 3 screws just to the point where you feel it is clamped. We don't want to over tighten these screws, but we also obviously don't want to under tighten. If we over tighten, we risk stripping the fin and ruining the fin box altogether. We make sure that we're locked in and our fin numbers are then dialed and ready to go. The last thing to do in terms of ski setup is deal with this wing. And as this is a large Works 01, I'll be using the 8-degree wing angle. Often a good kit to get is a 7 degrees, 8 degrees, 9 degrees. We don't tend to go too far away from those numbers. So how I like to go about setting this up is I put my 2 front screws in that wing. We make sure that the wing is at the bottom and the screws are at the top. I then take my back piece, put it round the back, go to one of my screws and just tighten that screw till I feel that we are attached. I'm not over screwing, only 1 or 2 turns once I realize. I then go to the other screw, feel it catch in the hole, and then I tighten it till the wing just about binds, so the fin is still just free to move. We then take our 8-degree wing angle, push against that wing, and then tighten it again. And just like all the screws on the ski, we do not need to massively over tighten these, just till that wing is clamped up. Push the wing angle out, and again, just like the front, it's always good practice to check the back and make sure we haven't made any mistakes. So now we are all set up. No matter whatever ski you have in your hands, it is now ready to go. But say you're a few sets in, things aren't quite feeling right, you're not quite feeling comfortable, or you just like to experiment. What are my recommendations with moving? First of all, I recommend leaving the fin if possible. The fin is a very, very complicated thing to understand and even to move and get to those exact numbers. I would suggest starting with your binding if you really feel the need to make a change. And the one thing with ski testing, it's very tough. It's very experimental. We can make general rules and guesses and ideas, but at the end of the day, it is down to you to feel it. Some general suggestions could be if you feel like the ski is a little bit too heavy, if you feel like it's almost plowing, it's turning well, but you can't quite get that ski to move and drive into that center line, maybe suggest trying your binding a hole back. However, if you feel like you're just stuck a little bit back, or if you feel like you're not getting that same swing off the second side, so you're getting that acceleration, you're getting that nice driving feeling, but you're not feeling connected to your swing, you feel a lot of slide through the finish of the turn, a lot of overpowering, then maybe that could be a sign to move those bindings forwards, allow yourself to get a little bit more connection, a little bit more balance on that ski. And again, like I said earlier, in terms of the fin, it is a very experimental thing. The one thing I very much recommend, if you're going to change that fin, keep good notes. Obviously, we have 3 things that we can change: the length, the depth, and the distance from tail. Maybe start with your distance from tail. Say the ski's feeling a little bit big, like it's not quite wanting to move through the finish of the turn very freely. A good thing to try can be moving that distance from tail number forward slightly. Say moving from 0.760 to 0.765, moving 5 thousandths or 10 thousandths. Say you're feeling like that ski's overturning through the finish. It feels like it's dumping you in just a little bit. If you've exhausted all your technical problems, you've spoken to a coach, you've spoken to the HO customer service team, see if they can help, maybe try moving that fin back 5 thousandths. One more quick setting with this fin that's quite easily noticeable is dealing with that length. Again, very hard to make set rules, but if you feel like you're constantly breaking at the waist as we're trying to turn in, especially for that offside, this can mean that you just have a little bit too much length in that fin. And again, there's no rules here, but if you try taking out a little bit of that length and you feel that feeling going away, that means that you're a little bit too long. If the ski feels a little bit squirrely, like it's starting in very aggressively, it's a little bit of a wild ride at the start of that turn again, usually on that offsider I've felt especially, it can be a good idea to try adding in a little bit of length. Again, maybe just a little bit of a 5/1000 and work your way towards the opposite feeling. So if you're feeling yourself breaking at the waist because you're maybe a little bit too long, take that little bit out, 5/1000, until it starts feeling a little bit squirrely. This can be a good way to work on your fin settings without getting too lost and knowing when you've gone too far. You can step it back and hopefully that is your perfect number. And again, there's an endless world of suggestions with the fin. You can play with it how you like, but I strongly recommend sticking at stock unless you have one professional help, you're a professional yourself, or you really feel like getting into that kind of thing. It can be a deep rabbit hole, so I suggest going down that path with caution, take good notes, and if you get lost, go back to stock and make sure you know where you feel comfortable on your ski. So the final thing that I want to talk about today is how to protect your brand new ski. One of my first recommendations, because skis get bumped around, they get stored in harsh places, make sure that you protect your ski with your Syndicate Neo sleeve. See, mine even has my name on it. Or your ski bag, something just to protect those edges of the ski, protect that tail if you're gonna leave it on the tail of the ski stood up all the time, and it just gives your ski an extra layer of protection. One warning with that, make sure you dry your ski before you put it in your bag or your sleeve. If you put those skis away wet, they end up sweating. It can cause some discoloration to the skis because of the time that it sits in the water. It's just not a good idea. Make sure you dry those skis if you can before you put it in your ski bag or your Neo sleeve. And some quick final points about looking after your ski is make sure you try keep it out of direct sunlight whenever possible or extreme heat. These skis are often black, they're often dark, so they get hot very, very quickly. Leaving them in the sun is not a good idea, and in a long-term process, it can cause degradation to the skis and cause problems down the line. Make sure you're storing them in dry, cool conditions and keeping it out of direct sunlight whenever you can. And that is all I have for you today. I really hope you enjoyed this video and that you now understand a little bit more about setting up your ski and you feel confident to go out there, put your bindings on, set up that fin and go take a rip. And remember, one final point, we've put a lot of time into those stock recommendations and settings, so usually they are a good place to be, if not very, very close. So make sure you don't get stuck down those rabbit holes, messing with those fins, messing with those bindings, and just go enjoy your ski set. Thank you so much everyone for watching this video, and go enjoy your new ski setup. Bye guys.